Good afternoon, students. This is very much an unusual way, I suppose, of conducting a class. At least it is for me. All of you know my limitations, I suppose, on technology. But I guess we've been thrust into a very difficult situation. We started off the semester with the clumsy arrangement in terms of the classroom. Remember, I told you it was like we were going into the depths of hell. And now with this awful horrendous virus that has befallen us. This is now the way they want classes to be taught. And what I want to assure you that I'm going to do everything I can to help you. And you may have gotten already the results of your exam over As You Like It. Some of you did have a little bit of difficulty, particularly, as I said, with the objective portion, and you didn't budget your time. You're actually going to do better on the remaining work in terms of the semester. All you're going to need to do, in a sense, is actually respect certain deadlines. And I can assure you we're going to get through this the best way that we can. I suppose you're being a bit amused by my appearance. I'm sitting in my living room. Not in my office. And if you notice on my mantle, you'll see in the distance a statue of Odysseus and his trusty little companion, Argus, his dog. So I'll begin by letting you know when we finished, before the spring break, I had called your attention to a topic on how the Merchant of Venice may be classified, and I offered you, in a sense, 4 ways that you can look at the play in terms of understanding 4 distinct classifications. 1, I repeat, you already know that the play is considered an example of romantic comedy. Another classification, and this is what I want to explain to you in a sense today, because I think it's very, very important in understanding the play. The Merchant of Venice very much is considered to be what I call a problem play. And in explaining to you what I mean by a problem play is a serious drama in which problems of human life are presented. In other words, it very much is what we would call a drama of ideas. It, for example, in dramatic form, it presents a kind of social problem or an issue. And in The Merchant of Venice, the question is, how are you going to deal with the question of how to view Shylock as a character? You would want to know, for example, is the play anti-Semitic? Is Shylock a villain, for example? What if Shylock were actually not a Jewish person? What if he were of some other, shall we say, religious, ethnic persuasion? And then you're going to have to take into account, what about prejudice and bias? And I think that you will know, in terms of reading the play, that almost all of the characters, for the most part, show a kind of prejudice and bias. I explained to you, in a sense, that the Christian society of Venice is probably a bit hypocritical in their attitude, for example, toward Shylock. One of the instances is they take it upon themselves in a kind of smug way to want to make him into one of their own. They forget that his identity is well rooted, if you will, in the Jewish faith. He pays a great deal of attention, for example, to his race and to his religion. It means a great deal of importance to him. Unlike, for example, the attitude expressed by his daughter. Now, these are problems that you are going to have to consider. And another definition of a problem play is it means the way that the play itself is viewed. It means the way that the play may be presented. It means, for example, the way that the play is structured, how characters, for example, are delineated. And the way that I can approach this aspect of showing you how The Merchant of Venice is a problem play is, if you will, for us to view certain characters in the play. And once again, you will see in operation clearly the theme that I had explained to you before we broke for spring break, the idea of appearance and reality. So why don't we examine 4 characters in particular in terms of the play. By all means, we would want to look at Porsha. And if you look at her in one regard, she probably represents what I call the best in womanly virtue. All you need to do, for example, is to pay attention to her name. And if you will look in the text, look in one of the footnotes, I do want you to know the origin of her name and why Shakespeare took special means to give this character that particular name. But as you look in terms of Porsha in a more realistic way, you can almost see that at times she shows a kind of deception. She also shows that she has a kind of racial bias. Particularly, pay attention to the second scene of Act 1 when she dismisses her previous suitors. And notice some of the, shall we say, comments that she will make about each suitor. And then do pay attention when you get to the casket scene or scenes where you deal with the Prince of Morocco, you deal with Aragon, and then you're going to deal with Bassanio. What she has to say, particularly about Morocco, and what she's going to say, for example, about Aragon. Now, in my explanation, I would want you to see that as a character, Porsha very much is a problem character in the play. And I want you to see her in a very realistic way in this regard. What we have to extol in terms of Porsha will be her human qualities. You remember what I had called your attention to in As You Like It. One of the criticisms that Rosalind made of Orlando in As You Like It was the fact that he would not accept her as a person. He almost put her up on this pedestal and wanted to almost look at her as a kind of goddess. She wanted to let him know that this was not how she actually is. She is a woman, and she is beset, as all humans, by imperfections. Now, another character, of course, is Shylock. And he very much is a problem in the play. He does require on our part a kind of delineation as a character. And I can offer you, if we look at Shylock simply by himself, please see that this can be, I think, a very important writing assignment for you, say on an exam, or if I choose to have you do a small paper for me, a kind of writing prompt. If you look at Shylock, I can offer you 3 ways to interpret him, if you will, as a character. Now, all of this will have to be based upon evidence from your having read the play. Now, if you will, look at Shylock, for example, as a villain in the play. Some say because of what he has proposed to do in terms of lending the money to Antonio, and the mere fact that he intends to collect in a most literal way his debt, that he has to be viewed as a villain. Some say, and if you read the play very carefully, I suppose you remember I did take, I think, an opportunity to show you a little bit of the video of the play itself. You almost could view him initially as a kind of, if you will, comic figure. All right. Once again, that could be a kind of, if you will, misleading interpretation. And another way, if you will, you can view Shylock as a tragic victim. And when I say for all purposes, he is a tragic victim of this Christian society. In this regard, you would want to see him, and I'm smiling because right now my cuckoo clock is going on. I don't know if it's trying to tell me a message or not, but bear with me. At least it's by my time just 1 o'clock, and it'll go off shortly. But to continue, you might look at him as a kind of tragic victim, if you will, of this Venetian Christian society. And in this regard, you might see him more as a kind of sympathetic figure. So I think it's very important for you to decide, based on evidence from having read the play, how you want to come to view him, if you will, as a character. Now, another character, in a sense, that we should look at, of course, is Bassanio. Now, Bassanio, to me, is not really that complex a character like Porsha and, of course, like Shylock. And I would like to stress this point to you about Bassanio. He, to me, is a kind of problematic character, again, playing upon my word problem. Notice, if you were going to compare him to Orlando and As You Like It, Bassanio performs no heroic function at all in this play. Note what Orlando did in As You Like It. So, when I say it's a kind of problematic character, really, he leaves to me a great deal to be desired. Now, to delineate him as a character, you have to decide, do you really consider him to be a sincere lover? Is he truly in love with Porsha? You're going to have to pay, if you will, a little bit of attention to his behavior in Act 4 of the play. Watch his behavior there, particularly when Porsha disguised will ask if Bassanio will give Porsha disguised as the lawyer or the law attendant the ring. On the other hand, you might simply want to dismiss him as a kind of, if you will, romantic spendthrift. Now, this has taken almost 15 minutes for me to explain to you what a problem play is, so I think what I'm trying to do is to emphasize the importance of The Merchant of Venice very much as a problem play. Look at Antonio. Is he truly viewed as a kind of platonic friend? Is he sincere? Or is he a friend with certain, shall I say, emotional ends in themselves? In other words, please consider, why is he so ready to go out on a limb, shall we say, to help Antonio? Now, very much there is a kind of love relationship supposedly between the two, Antonio and Bassanio. Decide which character is more sincere than the other, perhaps you will even decide that neither is. But once again, what I've attempted to do is to show you that The Merchant of Venice very much can be viewed as a problem play. Now, another classification of the Merchant of Venice, and my third classification for you, is that you want to look at it as a tragicomedy. That's Tragi, comedy. And this notion did not originate with Shakespeare. Aristotle, in his works, the Poetics, made it very clear that audience preferred sometimes different kinds of endings, if you will, for plays, rather than to say a play was just simply a comedy or a tragedy. So it is Aristotle who came up with the idea that you can have another classification for a play, and this was appropriately called a tragicomedy. Now, I would offer you in understanding, and I very much do feel that The Merchant of Venice will adhere, if you will, to these requirements of what will constitute a tragicomedy. One convention or characteristic of a tragicomedy is that it will go in for the use of disguises. It will go in for the use, if you will, of surprises. Now consider in terms of reading The Merchant of Venice how this is true. Also, it will go in for jealousy. Look at how important characters, a number of them, for example, will demonstrate jealousy. There is another characteristic of the tragicomedy, a contrast between what I will call deep villainy and exalted virtue. Here, for example, Shylock, the villain, and, of course, Porsha, representing virtue. Then, very much, as in romantic comedy, love, and this is also very true in letting us see The Merchant of Venice as a tragicomedy, love is of central interest. And that's true very much so. In fact, isn't that, for example, one of the dictates and points of the lottery itself? How about this as a characteristic, if you will, of tragicomedy? The use of what I'm going to call, or what I should suppose Aristotle says, unnatural situations. What more unnatural than a character will say, I want a pound of your fair flesh, literally. And the play itself, as tragicomedy, has a happy ending, although it may begin on what we would consider a kind of tragic beginning. In this regard, all you have to do is pay attention to the end of the fourth act, and the idea is Shylock is exposed as the villain in the play, and everything is going to turn. In other words, justice, in a sense, is served. And when I say that justice is served, I mean the idea of what is called poetic justice. Virtue is rewarded and vice is punished. So here you have this distinct, if you will, classification of The Merchant of Venice as a tragicomedy. Now, my last and fourth classification of the play, some say you can look at The Merchant of Venice as a kind of fairy tale. An outstanding critic of Shakespeare, meaning a scholar, a man by the name of Harley Granville Barker, said there's no reality to The Merchant of Venice. There's no more reality to The Merchant of Venice than if you were to regard it as reading a kind of fairy tale. In other words, It's very much like if you were looking at something like Jack and the Beanstalk. There's no reality. For example, what about this business, if you will, of the lottery itself, the idea of the caskets, that sort of thing? And look at the behavior, if you will, of Antonio. My gosh, Antonio. This is a dream come true for Antonio. The whole business of the debt, it's the story of a kind, if you will, wish fulfillment. You understand that if it were truly a kind of, shall we say, fairy tale, the idea is these characters do not actually think that Shylock is serious in his agreement. We have to remember that it was Shylock who said, we're going to take this contract, so as to speak, to a notary. They think because Shylock is a Jew that he can be dismissed, that he does not have to have, if you will, his debt repaid. Now, mentioning this business of the loan, it very much does partake of the so-called fairy tale motif. Remember reading about, for example, how about in Grimm's fairy tales, about the chopping up of people, all of the improbabilities, that sort of thing. How about the fact that Porsha and Nerissa will go to Venice disguised. Their disguise would have to be unusually, if you will, effective. So some say all of this is very silly. It very much is a fairy tale. Shakespeare knew what he was doing. He exploits the idea of the fairy tale frequently in his plays. Remember, if I taught you last semester, we read Richard III. You have in Richard III, remember, the ultimate wicked uncle. How about when we look at King Lear, look at his daughters. That is very much, don't you see, a version of the Cinderella story. I didn't get a chance, I suppose, yet to teach this, but if I were teaching, or if I had taught Midsummer Night's Dream, look, what is that whole business about the sprinkling of love juice? Remember the whole business about the little fairy creatures in the play. Now, what we have to remember in terms of the fairy tale is that the plot, if you're going to look at The Merchant of Venice, in terms of its plot formation, and you look at it as a fairy tale, it does not have to present a realistic, if you will, transparency of life itself. The purpose of art does not have to provide realism. Realism is simply one of the techniques that art uses, if you will. So I really have no problem if you were to read The Merchant of Venice as a fairy tale. Now, that whole business of the lottery. Look, today fathers do not have to have lotteries to determine their daughters' suitors, but just as Porsha's father had a concern, fathers today do so too. Think about that, some of you. All right, now, this is the inner story, if you will, of the whole business of the caskets, or, if you will, the chess stories. Now, it's almost coming upon 25 minutes, and it's taken this time, and I wanted, this initial, shall I say, video/lecture to be somewhat brief, because I really don't know, for all purposes, how this may turn out. I'm, if you will, very pleased with, I hope what I have said will be somewhat helpful to you. Now, if you will do this, probably by tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to send out some questions that I want you to answer. And this is going to help you, if you will, think about it, do a good job of this. This is going to help you in terms of the last exam. This is not the major exam itself. This is simply something else that I'm going to ask you to do. And I want you to answer these questions that you will receive and send them back to me by email. And what I want you to do is draw some information from the text of the play. In other words, what I want you to do, as you provide a kind of discussion for me, an answer to these questions, I want you to use some lines from the play to back up your assertion. So go in. Some of you had a little bit of difficulty in the last exam dealing with passages. This is a good opportunity for you to read, again, the play, find the appropriate passage to back up, in a sense, what you want to say. I think that's particularly good. So I will conclude this session this afternoon, and may I say that I wish all of you well. And once again, we're going to get through this. I believe it. So if I can help you, let me know. Have a good afternoon, and you will hear from me again. Upon occasion, I'm going to provide a video that I will simply ask you to view on your own. And then from time to time, I'm going to provide my own videos and lectures. This was the beginning, and I'm sure maybe I hope in time I will perfect it even better. But hopefully this might have been a kind of good beginning. Thank you. Take care of yourselves now. Goodbye.